What if I told you that one authorized modification, made in secret by a sergeant with a piece of scrap wire, reversed the course of air combat in the Pacific and saved over 100 American lives? And what if I told you his name was deliberately erased from history? This is the story of Technical Sergeant James McKenna and how 8 minutes of illegal work changed everything. August 17, 1943, 7:42 in the morning. Dobodura airfield, New Guinea. Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning, his eyes fixed on the young pilot climbing into the cockpit. Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, 6 combat missions, 0 kills. And waiting for him in the sky above New Guinea were 18 Japanese Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters, ready to intercept the morning patrol. Hayes was flying straight into a death trap, and McKenna knew it. For 8 months, McKenna had been maintaining P-38s in this brutal theater. He understood these machines intimately. Twin-engine fighters with twin-boom design, blindingly fast in straight flight, absolutely dominant at high altitude. Magnificent aircraft. But the P-38 carried one catastrophic flaw that was murdering American pilots every single day. It couldn't turn with a zero. The Zero fighter was lighter, far more agile. It could complete a full horizontal turn in half the time required by a P-38. In the chaos of a dogfight, that difference spelled the end. American doctrine was crystal clear. P-38 pilots must never attempt to turn with a zero. Never try to outmaneuver them in a turning engagement. Use your speed, use your altitude advantage. Dive in hard, shoot, climb out fast, hit and run. Never, ever get trapped in a turning fight. Hayes had attempted this doctrine 5 times. It hadn't worked once. The Zero pilots were too experienced, too clever. They baited American pilots into turns, sliced inside their turning radius, locked onto their tails, and shot them from the sky. The 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s in the previous 6 weeks alone. Most were destroyed after being caught in turning engagements. They had no way to escape. McKenna had witnessed too many pilots die. Good men, really just kids. They climbed into their P-38s, filled with confidence, and returned in wooden boxes. Or they didn't return at all. The official training manual blamed pilot error. The instructors insisted these pilots simply weren't following doctrine properly. But McKenna understood the real problem. It wasn't the pilots at all. It was the control cables. The P-38's aileron control cables ran through the twin booms all the way to the tail section, then forward through a series of pulleys to reach the wing control surfaces. The cable system contained slack. Not much, perhaps 3/8 of an inch at full deflection. But that minuscule amount of slack created a fatal delay between stick movement and aileron response. At high speeds, it barely mattered. At low speeds, during hard turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay became the difference between rolling inside a zero's turn and being shot down. McKenna had brought this issue to the engineering officer 2 months earlier. The officer's response was dismissive. The cable tension fell within specifications. Factory tolerances permitted that slack. Modifying it would void the aircraft warranty. Beyond that, no field mechanic possessed authorization to alter flight control systems. That required engineering approval directly from Lockheed. And Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California. So McKenna did something that violated every single regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. He took a piece of piano wire salvaged from a damaged aircraft, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape, and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes' left aileron control cable. The modification required 8 minutes. It added 0.4 pounds of tension to the cable. It eliminated the slack completely. Nobody noticed. The inspection crew didn't check cable tension that morning. They were focused on engine oil levels and ammunition loads. McKenna remained silent. He watched Hayes taxi to the runway, watched him lift off, watched the P-38 disappear into the morning sky toward the Japanese fighters. What transpired in the next 17 minutes would transform how every P-38 in the Pacific theater flew. The first pilot McKenna lost to a zero was Lieutenant David Chun. July 9, 1943. Chun had been in theater for just 3 weeks. McKenna had serviced his aircraft every morning. They talked about California. Chun was from Sacramento. McKenna from Long Beach. Both had worked on automobiles before the war. Chun took off at 6:15 on a fighter sweep over Lae. He returned 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes punched through his left boom, and a terrifying story about a zero that had gotten inside his turn. Chun explained he'd tried to roll out and dive away exactly as the manual instructed, but the airplane felt sluggish to respond, like there was a delay between when he moved the stick and when the aircraft actually rolled. The zero had nearly killed him. The only thing that saved his life was his wingman shooting the zero off his tail. McKenna examined the bullet holes. They formed a tight group. Perfect deflection shooting. The zero pilot had led Chun flawlessly, had anticipated precisely where Chun's airplane would be. That shouldn't have been possible if Chun had rolled hard and dove immediately. Unless the airplane had delayed just long enough for the zero pilot to calculate the lead perfectly. Chun never flew again. His aircraft went back to the depot for repairs. McKenna never saw him after that. 3 weeks later, he heard Chun had been killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. Same story. Caught in a turning fight. Couldn't roll out fast enough. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. Morrison was a flight leader. Experienced. 11 kills. He knew the P-38 inside and out. Understood its limitations completely. Flew intelligently. On August 3rd, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison destroyed 1 zero on the first pass. Came around for another attack run. 2 zeros reversed on him. McKenna heard the radio transmission afterward. Morrison tried to roll inverted and split SOA. Called out that his controls felt mushy, unresponsive. The zeros stayed with him through the entire maneuver. Shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman reported it looked like Morrison's airplane wasn't responding fast enough, like he was fighting against the controls. Morrison died in the crash. Morrison's crew chief was a friend of McKenna's, a guy named Rodriguez from Texas. Rodriguez was convinced something was fundamentally wrong with Morrison's aircraft. He inspected everything after they recovered the wreckage. Engine settings, control surface rigging, cable tensions. Everything measured within spec. Nothing mechanically wrong with the airplane. The official report concluded pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he knew well. Most he'd only met briefly while conducting pre-flight checks. But he'd worked on all their aircraft. Had signed off on their maintenance logs. Had watched them taxi out. Watched them take off. Some returned. Some didn't. The ones who came back told identical stories. The P-38 felt slow to respond in hard maneuvering. Like there was a slight lag between control input and aircraft reaction. Most pilots assumed that was simply how the airplane handled. Heavy fighter. Large control surfaces. Some delay was expected, normal even. But McKenna knew that wasn't normal at all. He'd felt that delay with his own hands when he worked on the control cables. That tiny bit of slack in the system. He started paying careful attention to the sound the cables made when he tensioned them during maintenance. There was a specific tone. A sort of low twang when you plucked them. Loose cables sounded distinctly different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference clearly. Every single P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose. Within spec, yes, but loose. He mentioned this to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison died. Rodriguez asked what could possibly be done about it. McKenna said nothing official. But unofficially, there was a solution. It just required braking regulations that could get them both court-martialed. The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't understand what to do. They knew perfectly well. Every briefing emphasized it repeatedly. Every training flight drilled it relentlessly. Never turn with a zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Hit and run. The doctrine was absolutely clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow doctrine. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old. Farm kid from Iowa. He'd flown 6 combat missions and scored 0 kills. Not because he lacked skill as a pilot, because he followed the rules precisely. And the rules kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a clean shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a 0 from altitude. Built up speed to 400 miles per hour. Came in from the sun exactly as the manual prescribed. Got the 0 centered in his gun sight. Started to pull lead for deflection. The 0 snap rolled left and dove. Hayes tried to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but felt like it was moving through thick mud. By the time his aircraft pointed where he wanted it, the 0 had vanished. Hayes pulled out, climbed back to altitude. No shot fired. The 4th mission was worse. Hayes and his wingman jumped 2 zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes got the first burst off. Missed completely. The 0 reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to follow. His wingman called out 2 more zeros diving in from above. Hayes tried to roll back level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly. Just slowly enough that one of the diving zeros got a 3-second burst into Hayes' right boom. 20-millimeter cannon shells. They didn't penetrate the structure, but they terrified Hayes badly enough that he broke off the engagement and ran for home with his engine trailing smoke. 5th mission. Hayes watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, from Boston. They'd gone through training together. On August 14th, Parker got separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finschhafen. 2 zeros locked onto his tail. Parker tried everything. Rolled hard. Reversed. Attempted to scissor. The zeros stayed with him through every single maneuver. Hayes heard Parker on the radio calling desperately for help. Heard the raw panic in his voice. Heard him say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough. Heard the gunfire. Heard Parker scream. Then nothing. Hayes didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bed remained empty. His personal effects were packed up and shipped home. His P-38 was written off as combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical issues whatsoever. The official cause was listed as pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna had worked on Parker's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect. Engine timing. Control surface alignment. Cable tension within spec. The airplane was mechanically fine. But Parker was dead anyway, and McKenna knew exactly why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls. That tiny bit of slack, the manual said, was acceptable. It had killed Parker just like it had killed Morrison and Shun and 14 others. The worst part was the smell. Every morning McKenna worked in the maintenance area. The smell of aviation fuel and hot metal and hydraulic fluid filled his senses. It was the smell of aircraft preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft would return. Some wouldn't, and McKenna would be there the next morning, breathing the same smells. Working on more aircraft. Watching more pilots walk out to machines that couldn't respond fast enough to keep them alive. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes came to the maintenance area. Found McKenna working on his assigned P-38. Hayes asked if there was anything at all McKenna could do to make the airplane roll faster. Hayes said he didn't care if it was regulation or not. He just wanted a chance to survive. McKenna looked at Hayes, saw the fear in his eyes, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 23 o'clock hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil mixed with tropical humidity. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes' P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled. Felt the slack. Maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension caught. His hands were covered in grease, and his fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work. But he could feel that slack. Clearly, it was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a salvaged P-38 that had ground-looped 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was scrapped, but McKenna had pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag without really knowing why. Now he knew. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bent it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff. Fought back against the pliers. His hand slipped twice. Cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him 8 minutes to get the bend precisely right. The Z shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack completely. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was extremely tight. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept moving. Shadows jumped across the cable system. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back, despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin. Dropped it. Heard it bounce somewhere deep in the boom. Spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time, his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer found him performing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, walked out of the hangar at 1:15. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance, he heard aircraft engines. Japanese night raiders, probably. The sound made his stomach clench. He'd just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would be directly responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30, he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes' aircraft, watched Hayes walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 7:42, Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky. Watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft. Watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace. And then all he could do was wait. The engagement started at 8:14. Hayes' flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was positioned behind them. Perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 at the back of the formation. Dove from altitude. Built speed to 380 miles per hour. The Zero grew larger in his gun sight. Hayes could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 4.50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon hammered. Tracers reached out. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the Zero's wing. Not enough. The Zero snap rolled right and dove. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay. No lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the instant he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time. Got his nose down. The Zero was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Zero's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes' first kill. But there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out Zeros diving from above. Hayes looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive. Coming fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward. Started to climb, but the Zeros were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, keep running. That was the doctrine. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left. Pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead Zero. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The Zero was in a bad position. Exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired, hit the Zero in the left wing root. The wing folded. The Zero tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No delay. No fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted, the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a completely different aircraft. Like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 Zero made a mistake. Reversed too hard. Bled too much speed. Hayes got inside his turn. Close range. Maybe 200 feet. He fired. Couldn't miss. The Zero came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes' canopy. He felt the P-38 shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude. Reformed with what was left of his flight, they headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Dobodura at 9:03, McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna. Hayes said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes' engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. He'd been watching Hayes' element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes' P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, certainly, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still running on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today. Faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes' airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment, then told him everything: the piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38, same piano wire tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning, came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 8 minutes, changes everything. The modification spread pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25th. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Dusap. He heard about the modification from a pilot who transferred from Dobodura. Watkins was skeptical, but he tried it on 1 aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobodura noticed something was different, but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every Zero destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed. But officially, nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over WWII. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius, except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll, knew the timing perfectly. But this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base, confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics. But their aircraft were responding faster. Fractionally, but enough to matter. Enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom. A 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, wasn't a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics would work. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms. And the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, and could take more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September trying tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at a better than 1-to-1 rate. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943 when a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations. But it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. But McKenna never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, shot down 16 aircraft. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force, retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, went back to working on cars, opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years. Never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic. Fixed airplanes, that's all. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives, based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back: Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, the others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner, did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew, did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there. Different owner now. But on the wall in the back office, there's a faded photograph. A young mechanic in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees. Through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. So here's the answer to our opening question. One authorized modification, 8 minutes of work, a piece of scrap wire, and the courage to break the rules when lives were at stake. That's what reversed the course of air combat in the Pacific. That's what saved over 100 American pilots. And the man who did it asked for nothing in return. His name was deliberately left out of the official reports. But now you know his story. If this story moved you the way it moved us, help us honor these forgotten heroes. Hit that subscribe button right now. Every subscription helps us bring more untold stories from World War II to light. Stories like McKenna's that deserve to be remembered. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. And if you know a veteran or the family of a veteran, share this video with them. These stories matter. These people mattered. And together, we're making sure they're never forgotten. Thank you for watching. And thank you for keeping their memory alive.